So modes are something that's often discussed, but they're often really misinterpreted. A lot of people suggest that modes are just the major scale, but you start on a different note. Like for example, play C major but start on D and you get a D Dorian sound. Well, that's not actually the case of how modes work, although sometimes out of context it might work. But from what I've seen on the internet, I thought I would chip in and give what I think modes are and kind of give my own explanation of the modes and try to help some people out. Hey, what's going on everyone? This is Nick. If you're new here, I'm a Brooklyn-based musician, and today we're going to be talking about what exactly are modes. So I'm going to start off with playing exactly that. I'm going to play a C major scale starting on D, and then I'm going to show you why it doesn't always work like that. So here we have D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D. Now out of context that does sound like a D Dorian scale, but however, I'm going to use my Boss OC3 along with my Electroharmonic Superego to generate an F bass note. So this time I'm going to play exactly the same thing except over an F bass note. Now I'm going to play it over an A bass note. Now I'm going to play it over an E bass note. So as you can see, as I changed around the bass notes, the sound of the mode changed. It didn't really sound like D Dorian anymore. It sounded like F Lydian or A Aeolian or E Phrygian respectively. Another reason why just simply starting a scale on a different note doesn't work is because realistically, how often do you hear just a straight up major scale played in music? Like if you're improvising a solo, how often are you just going... You don't really hear that often, you know. In music we have more intervals than that. We don't only go stepwise in the scale motion, and we don't always just use scales. It can also work another way, and it depends on what kind of triad we have. So for example, if I played you an F major triad over a C bass note, and I played the same exact thing, although the C is in the bass, it's not actually sounding like C Ionian, it's actually sounding like F Lydian. That has to do with the Overtone series and the way that music works. If you're not familiar with the Overtone series, essentially every time you play a note, there's actually some overtones in that same note. It kind of informs us on things that might sound good, like for example major and minor triads, because in the Overtone series, the first interval we have is an octave, then we have a perfect fifth, perfect fourth, and then we have a major third, and then we have a minor third. So what this means is that the chords that using those intervals are sort of like the strongest chords. Those triads are going to be the strongest. Major chords are going to be the strongest chords because those are the overtones that we have in sequence. So even though we had a C on the bottom, we had an F major triad, and in compliance with the F major triad, we had those intervals. We had a perfect fifth and we had a major third. So it's going to sound more Lydian than Ionian. So really the modes are just a perspective on a major scale. It's the same way that you could look at me like this, or you could look at me like this, where I look a lot more creepy. And even though I'm the same person, I look differently depending on the different perspectives. It's the same kind of thing with the scale. The scale sounds differently depending on whatever perspective you're playing it from. And there's major modes, but there's also different modes like harmonic major, harmonic minor, melodic minor, etc. There's a bunch of different ones. And if you're interested in any of those, I have this playlist called Mode Guide where I actually have videos on all of those modes. So you can check out it and you can dive into those if you're more interested in this. And so really modes have more to do with what's going on with the harmony, with the chords, with the bass line, etc. All this stuff happening at the same time rather than just like starting on a different note on your guitar. When we hear music, we don't just hear the guitar, we hear the whole picture. Another thing you can do with the modes is you can actually generate chords from the modes. So for example, if we took a C major scale, starting from F and went in diatonic fifths, meaning we're going to take F and then we're going to go a fifth to C and etc. We're going to keep going. I'm going to use my Walrus Audio's sustain button so that way you can hear the sound of the chord it creates when we play all those intervals. So this chord you're hearing right now is an F Lydian chord. It's an F major 7, 9, sharp 11, 13 chord. This is sort of similar to pitch axis theory, and if you get really good at learning your scales on the fretboard of the neck, you can generate chords on the guitar using the modes. Whenever I'm playing chords, I don't necessarily always think shapes, I think more of scales and the available notes. So if I have an F major chord, I might start off with this F open triad, but then I added this 13, the root, and the 9, and the third, so I'm having some movement going on. Here's another F major triad that we have the fifth on top. So simply, I'm just playing notes within the scale or mode. Oops, gave ourselves a sharp 9 there. And the result is we get a really cool sound and it's really interesting chords. Not a lot of people play all those voicings. I'm not thinking of voicing, I'm thinking of notes. The same way like a piano player might try to compose like a baccarat on the spot. And if you want to know more about the modes and you want to go a little more in detail about like the intervals and modes and all that stuff, check out this video I have on modes from bright to dark, where I go through the modes in parallel. And what that does is that you only change one note at a time and it kind of morphs so you can hear the colors of all the modes. But anyway, that's about all I have for you today. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this, please like and subscribe, leave a comment if you have any questions. And again, thanks for making it to the end of the video, and I hope to see you next week. Take care.